The sun hung low over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the towering skyscrapers as the golden light of early evening bathed the city in warmth, the hum of traffic blending with the murmur of busy pedestrians on the sidewalks below. In a stylish cafe on the corner of 5th Avenue and 59th Street, the clink of coffee cups and the rustle of menus filled the air, with the rich aroma of roasted beans adding to the atmosphere of quiet elegance. Inside, a woman in her late 30s, with sleek dark hair and an air of quiet power, sat at a table by the window, waiting, her eyes flickering over her phone screen every few seconds as if expecting a message. The woman, Sarah Davis, was the CEO of a thriving tech company, known not only for her business acumen but also for her commanding presence in the boardroom. Today, however, her focus was elsewhere. Her daughter, Ella, was about to meet a man her mother had carefully selected, a match she believed would suit the young woman perfectly. Ella was beautiful, with a delicate, graceful air about her, a striking combination of her mother's sharp features and her father's soft, kind eyes. Sarah watched her daughter as she fiddled with her phone, her eyes flitting nervously around the room. "Mom, do you really think this is a good idea?" Ella asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she met Sarah's gaze with uncertainty. Sarah smiled gently, her lips curling with warmth. "Sweetheart, you've got to put yourself out there. Give it a chance. Who knows, maybe this guy will be the one. You won't know until you meet him." Ella frowned, clearly unconvinced. "But we don't know anything about him except what you've told me, which isn't much," she said, glancing out the window at the passing traffic. "It's a blind date, Ella. You don't need to know everything," Sarah replied, her tone light but firm. She knew Ella was struggling with the idea of trusting someone new, especially in a city as vast and impersonal as New York. Sarah had arranged the meeting with the hope that her daughter would move past her previous heartbreaks and find someone who could make her happy. As the thought crossed her mind, the door to the cafe swung open, and a man walked in, his tall frame and broad shoulders filling the doorway. Sarah's attention was drawn immediately to him. He had an air of quiet confidence about him, the kind of man who didn't need to announce his presence, and yet, it was unmistakable. His dark hair was neatly combed, his suit was sharp but not overly flashy, and there was a kind of grounded, easygoing energy to him, a sense of humility that she found intriguing. Sarah had been expecting a polished, well-spoken gentleman, someone who could impress her daughter with wealth and status, but this man, this one, was different. His eyes scanned the cafe until they landed on their table, a slow smile spreading across his face as he walked toward them. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice rich and warm, as though he had all the time in the world. Sarah stood to greet him, offering her hand. "Yes, I'm Sarah, and you must be," she trailed off, unsure of the name. "Mark," the man finished for her, his smile broadening as he shook her hand firmly. "Mark Reynolds," he added. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Nice to meet you, Mark," Sarah said, her curiosity piqued as she studied him for a moment. There was something about him that defied the polished persona she had expected, something real, down to earth. "Please, have a seat." She gestured to the empty chair across from Ella, who had been quietly observing the interaction. Mark sat down, his eyes immediately locking onto Ella, a spark of recognition passing between them. "Ella, right?" he asked, his smile turning genuine. Ella nodded, unsure of what to make of him, her gaze flicking nervously from Sarah to Mark. "Yes, that's me," she replied softly. "It's nice to meet you, Mark." "The pleasure's all mine," Mark said, his voice warm and sincere. There was an ease about him, a kind of presence that was both calming and inviting. As they all settled into the conversation, the awkwardness began to fade, and Sarah found herself unexpectedly engaged. Mark wasn't like the typical suitor she had imagined for Ella. He wasn't trying to impress them with his wealth or status. Instead, he was quietly confident, self-assured without being arrogant. As the conversation flowed, Mark shared stories about his work, how he had started a small construction company that focused on affordable housing, how he had built it from the ground up, with little more than a dream and a lot of hard work. Sarah found herself genuinely interested, and even more surprising, she noticed Ella starting to relax. The young woman was no longer staring at her phone. Her posture had softened, and she was leaning slightly forward, listening intently to Mark's stories. "That's incredible," Ella said, her voice more animated now. "I can't believe you managed to build all of that on your own. From nothing." "It wasn't easy," Mark said with a humble shrug, "but it was worth it. Seeing people's lives change because of something I helped create. There's nothing like it." Sarah watched the exchange between the two, impressed by how quickly Ella seemed to warm to him. She had expected Ella to be reserved, distant, perhaps even dismissive of Mark, but instead, there was a spark of interest in her eyes, a genuine curiosity. "It sounds like you're making a real difference," Ella said, her voice softer now. "It's inspiring." Mark smiled, clearly pleased by her response. "Thanks, that means a lot." The conversation continued, flowing easily between them, and Sarah could see the way Ella's walls were slowly starting to crumble. It was a moment of hope, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this man could be the one to bring Ella out of her shell, to show her that there was more to life than work, status, and appearances. But then, just as the conversation seemed to reach a moment of calm, the door to the cafe swung open once more, and a man walked in, his eyes scanning the room before landing on their table. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him instantly. It was Daniel, her ex-husband, and father to Ella. He had always been a man of contradictions. His gentle nature had once made him the perfect partner, but somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged. Daniel had always been the kind of person who lived life on his own terms, never bound by convention or expectation, but seeing him now, standing there with a child in tow, made Sarah feel something she hadn't expected. It made her feel a pang of longing. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her voice almost inaudible. Daniel's gaze flicked to her, then to Ella, who was now staring at him, her face unreadable. "I was just picking up Ben," he said quietly, his tone easy but with a certain hesitation. Sarah glanced down at the young boy standing beside him, around 6 or 7 years old, with big brown eyes and a mop of unruly hair. Ben smiled shyly at Ella, clearly unsure of what was going on. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "I'm Ben." Ella blinked in surprise, her eyes flicking from Daniel to Ben, and then back to Mark, who had now gone still, his face a mask of confusion. Sarah's mind raced. The sight of Daniel with a child that wasn't Ella made her heart beat faster. She hadn't known he had remarried, let alone had a child. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, a sense of betrayal that she hadn't expected, not from him. "You've got a kid?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Daniel shrugged. "Yeah, Ben's mine," he said simply. "I remarried a couple of years ago." Sarah's mind was reeling, and before she could stop herself, she found herself speaking the words that had been weighing on her for years. "You always said you didn't want kids, Daniel." Daniel's gaze softened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I know, Sarah, but things change," he said quietly, his eyes drifting to Ben. "I guess life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it?" Sarah didn't know what to say. She could feel the weight of the moment, the tension that had suddenly thickened in the air, the fragile balance between the two men. Mark, with his grounded sincerity, and Daniel, with his unpredictable charm. Sarah swallowed hard, feeling her emotions collide in a whirlwind, just as the weight of everything hung in the balance. Ella stood up, her voice clear and steady. "I think I need to go," she said, her gaze flicking between the three men, then back to Sarah, her expression unreadable. Sarah reached out instinctively to her daughter. "Ella, wait," but Ella shook her head. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice colder than Sarah had ever heard it. "I just need some space." With that, Ella turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Sarah standing there, her heart sinking as she watched her daughter disappear into the crowded streets of Manhattan. Mark stood up then, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'll go after her," he said, his voice firm, and without waiting for a response, he rushed out of the cafe after Ella, leaving Sarah alone with Daniel and